London. 1888. The largest city on earth. The capital of the British Empire. A city of wealth, industry, science, and power. At the height of its influence, London controlled trade routes, governments, and territories across the globe. Millions of people flooded into the city searching for opportunity and survival. To the outside world, Victorian London represented progress and civilization. But beneath the grand buildings, elegant theatres, and royal ceremonies, another London existed. A darker London hidden behind smoke, poverty, disease, and fear. In the east end of the city stood Whitechapel, one of the poorest and most dangerous districts in Britain. Its streets were overcrowded and filthy. Entire families lived inside tiny rented rooms. Unemployment was everywhere. Crime was part of everyday life. The air smelled of coal smoke, sewage, and alcohol. Children wandered barefoot through muddy alleys. Workers labored long hours for miserable wages. Many people survived only one day at a time. For thousands of women, prostitution became the final option between survival and starvation. Most were not criminals or members of organized brothels. They were poor women trying to earn enough money for food, shelter, or a bed inside a cheap lodging house. Every night, the streets of Whitechapel filled with desperate people searching for money, safety, or escape. Violence was common. Robberies and assaults happened regularly. Police patrols struggled to control the area. To wealthy citizens living in other parts of London, Whitechapel felt like another world entirely. A maze of dark alleys, narrow streets, crowded taverns, and dangerous shadows. And in the autumn of 1888, those shadows would hide something far worse than ordinary crime. A killer was watching the streets. Silent. Unknown. Patient. At first, nobody understood what was happening. Murders were not unusual in Whitechapel. Death was already part of life in the East End. But soon, the brutality of the crimes began to terrify even the most hardened residents. Rumors spread rapidly through the district. People whispered about a man moving through the fog at night. Newspapers began printing shocking headlines. Fear slowly consumed the streets. No one knew his identity. No one ever saw his true face clearly. Yet before the year ended, the entire world would know his name. Jack the Ripper. The fear did not arrive all at once. It spread slowly through Whitechapel, like the fog that drifted across its streets every night. At first, most residents believed the violence was simply another tragedy in a district already filled with suffering. But the murders soon became impossible to ignore. During the late summer of 1888, police officers in the East End were already overwhelmed by constant crime. Gangs operated openly in many neighborhoods. Drunken fights filled the taverns after midnight. Theft, assault, and prostitution were everywhere. The streets remained crowded long after dark, illuminated only by weak gas lamps struggling against the smoke and fog. The Metropolitan Police Force was still relatively young. Detectives relied mostly on witness statements and basic observation. Fingerprint analysis did not yet exist. Modern forensic science had not been developed. Investigators had few tools and even fewer answers. At the same time, Whitechapel itself created the perfect environment for a killer to disappear. Its narrow alleyways twisted between crowded buildings like a maze. Countless lodging houses allowed strangers to come and go unnoticed. Thousands of people moved through the district every night. Anyone could vanish into the darkness within seconds. For women living on the streets, danger was constant. Many spent their nights searching for clients simply to afford food or temporary shelter. Some earned only enough money for a single bed inside a common lodging house. If they failed to pay, they slept outside in the cold. Alcohol became an escape from hopelessness. Many women struggled with addiction. Others suffered from illness or homelessness. Victorian society judged them harshly, but offered little help. And somewhere within this chaos, a murderer had begun hunting. His victims shared similar lives. They were vulnerable women living in poverty. Women the rest of society often ignored. Women whose disappearances did not immediately alarm the wealthy districts of London. But the killer's methods changed everything. The violence shocked even experienced police officers. Newspapers described the crimes in horrifying detail. Citizens who once ignored Whitechapel suddenly became obsessed with it. Reporters flooded the East End searching for stories. Crowds gathered near crime scenes. Rumors spread faster every day. Some believed the killer was a doctor because of the precision of certain wounds. Others thought he might be a butcher, a sailor, or even a member of the upper class moving secretly through the slums at night. Fear transformed ordinary people into suspects. Neighbors accused neighbors. Strangers watched each other with suspicion. Every shadow became threatening. And then came the murder that changed everything forever. The murder of Mary Ann Nichols. Mary Ann Nichols was born into a world very different from the one in which she would die. Known to friends and family as Polly, she had once lived an ordinary life. She married young and had children. But over time, poverty, alcohol, and separation destroyed the stability she once knew. By 1888, she was living in lodging houses and surviving on the streets of Whitechapel. Like many women in the East End, she struggled daily for food, shelter, and money. Most nights ended with uncertainty. On the evening of August 30, 1888, Polly Nichols wandered through the streets searching for enough money to pay for a bed. Witnesses later recalled seeing her heavily intoxicated but still trying to find clients before dawn. At around 1:30 in the morning, she was seen leaving a lodging house after failing to afford her stay. According to reports, she told others she would soon earn the money needed for a bed. Those were some of the last known words she ever spoke. Hours later, in the darkness before sunrise, a cart driver named Charles Cross walked through Bucks Row, a narrow and poorly lit street in Whitechapel. As he moved through the fog, he noticed a shape lying on the ground. At first, he believed it was simply a drunk woman sleeping in the street. But as he approached, something felt wrong. Another man named Robert Paul soon joined him. Together, they leaned closer toward the body. The woman was lying on her back, motionless beneath the dim glow of a gas lamp. The men quickly realized she was dead. A police officer was alerted nearby. When authorities arrived, they discovered that Mary Ann Nichols had suffered brutal injuries. Her throat had been deeply cut. Additional mutilations covered her body. The scene shocked even experienced officers. Yet in the darkness of Whitechapel, the killer had already disappeared. No witness reported hearing screams. No one saw the murderer escape. No murder weapon was found. The attack appeared fast, silent, and terrifyingly precise. Police initially believed the crime might be another isolated act of violence common to the East End. But some investigators immediately sensed something unusual. The brutality of the injuries suggested extreme rage, or something even more disturbing. News of the murder spread quickly through Whitechapel. Newspapers began publishing sensational articles describing the crime in graphic detail. Fear grew across the district. Women became increasingly afraid to walk alone at night. Still, few people imagined that this was only the beginning. Because the killer would strike again. And the next murder would make the terror of Whitechapel even worse. Only 8 days after the murder of Mary and Nichols, fear returned to the streets of Whitechapel. On the night of September 7, 1888, another woman wandered through the East End searching for money and shelter. Her name was Annie Chapman. Like many of the Ripper's future victims, Annie had once lived a more stable life. She had married, raised children, and experienced periods of normality. But illness, alcoholism, and poverty gradually destroyed everything around her. By the time she arrived in Whitechapel, she was struggling to survive day by day. She often slept in cheap lodging houses and earned money through casual work and prostitution. Witnesses described her as physically weak and suffering from poor health. Yet despite her difficult life, many people remembered her as kind and sociable. During the early hours of September 8, Annie was seen near Spitalfields. She had been drinking and was attempting to earn enough money for a place to sleep. Around 5:30 in the morning, residents of Hanbury Street slowly began waking for work. One of them was a man named John Davis. As he stepped into the backyard behind his building at 29, Hanbury Street, he froze in horror. The body of Annie Chapman lay near the steps. Her throat had been cut deeply. But unlike the previous murder, the mutilations were far more severe. The killer had spent additional time with the body, performing horrifying injuries that shocked investigators and doctors alike. Police officers arriving at the scene immediately recognized disturbing similarities to the Nichols murder. Another woman from Whitechapel. Another nighttime attack. Another throat cut with extreme violence. But this time, the brutality had escalated dramatically. The murderer appeared more confident. More controlled. More dangerous. For investigators, the reality became impossible to deny. Whitechapel was facing a serial killer. News exploded across London. Newspapers competed aggressively for every new detail. Headlines filled the city with panic. Some journalists accused the police of incompetence. Others published wild theories about secret societies, foreign criminals, or insane doctors roaming the East End at night. The public demanded answers. Police increased patrols throughout Whitechapel. Detectives questioned hundreds of witnesses. Vigilance committees formed among local citizens who patrolled the streets themselves after dark. But despite the growing fear, the killer continued to move unseen through the crowded district. Witnesses provided confusing descriptions of suspicious men. Some reported seeing individuals speaking quietly with Annie Chapman shortly before her death. But none of the accounts led to an arrest. The investigation was becoming chaos. Every day brought new rumors. Every stranger became suspicious. Every dark alley felt dangerous. And then, only weeks later, Whitechapel would descend into even greater horror. A night that would become infamous in criminal history. The night of the double event. By the end of September 1888, Whitechapel was living in constant fear. The murders of Mary and Nichols and Annie Chapman had transformed the East End into a nightmare. Women were terrified to walk alone after dark. Police patrols filled the streets. Newspapers published endless theories and terrifying headlines every morning. Yet despite the massive investigation, the killer remained invisible. Then came the night that shocked London more than any other. Sunday, September 30th, 1888. A night that history would remember as the double event. The first victim was Elizabeth Stride. Born in Sweden, Stride had moved to London years earlier searching for a better life. Like the previous victims, poverty and hardship eventually pushed her into the dangerous streets of Whitechapel. Friends described her as quieter and more reserved than many others living in the district. Late that evening, multiple witnesses reported seeing Stride with different men near Berner Street. Some accounts described calm conversations. Others mentioned arguments. Investigators would later struggle to determine which witness statements were accurate and which were distorted by fear and confusion. At approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, a man driving a horse cart entered Dutfield's yard off Berner Street. His horse suddenly became nervous and refused to move forward. Moments later, the driver discovered the body of Elizabeth Stride lying in the darkness. Her throat had been cut deeply. Blood still flowed from the wound, suggesting the killer had escaped only moments earlier. But something about the murder seemed different. Unlike the previous victims, Stride's body showed almost no mutilations. Some investigators believed the killer may have been interrupted before completing his attack. Perhaps the arrival of the cart forced him to flee suddenly into the night. If that theory was correct, it meant something terrifying. The murderer was still nearby. And less than an hour later, the nightmare became even worse. Roughly 1 mile away, inside Mitre Square, another body was discovered. The victim was Catherine Eddowes. Eddowes had spent part of the evening in police custody for public drunkenness before being released shortly before the murder. Witnesses later saw her walking through the streets alone during the early hours of the morning. At around 1:45 a.m., a police officer patrolling Mitre Square entered the dark corner of the square and made a horrifying discovery. Catherine Eddowes had been murdered with unimaginable brutality. Her throat had been cut. Her face had been severely mutilated. The injuries inflicted upon her body were more savage than anything investigators had seen before. The killer had worked quickly and efficiently in near total darkness. And once again, he vanished without capture. The realization spread rapidly through London. The murderer had killed twice in a single night. Fear turned into hysteria. Newspapers called the killer a monster. Citizens accused police of complete failure. Rumors exploded across the city faster than investigators could control them. Then, during the investigation, another chilling piece of evidence appeared. Near a blood-stained piece of Catherine Eddowes' clothing, officers discovered a message written on a wall in chalk. Its meaning remains debated even today. But for many people in 1888, it felt like the killer himself was speaking directly to the city. And soon afterward, the world would receive a letter signed with a name that would become legendary forever. Jack the Ripper. As panic spread across London, the investigation entered a new and terrifying phase. The newspapers could speak of little else. Every murder dominated the front pages. Citizens gathered outside police stations demanding answers. Vigilance committees patrolled Whitechapel at night carrying whistles and clubs, hoping to catch the killer themselves. But the murderer remained ahead of everyone. Then, in late September 1888, something arrived that would change the case forever. A letter. It was delivered to the Central News Agency in London and addressed directly to the police investigation. At first, journalists believed it was merely another cruel hoax. The investigation had already attracted countless false confessions and fake messages from attention seekers. But this letter was different. The writer mocked the police openly. He spoke about the murders with chilling confidence and claimed responsibility for the killings. Near the end of the message, the writer signed a name never seen before. Jack the Ripper. Those 3 words would soon spread across the entire world. Until that moment, the murderer had no universally known identity. Newspapers had used different names such as the Whitechapel Murderer, or Leather Apron. But after the publication of the letter, the press embraced the new title immediately. Jack the Ripper became a sensation. The name sounded theatrical, mysterious, and terrifying. It transformed an unknown killer into a dark legend. Newspapers printed the signature repeatedly, helping create one of the most infamous names in criminal history. Days later, another letter arrived. This one became known as the Saucy Jackie postcard. The writer referred directly to the double-event murders and hinted that more killings were coming soon. Then came the most disturbing package of all. In October 1888, a letter titled, "From Hell," was delivered to George Lusk, leader of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. Inside the package was half of a human kidney preserved in alcohol. The accompanying message was written with terrible spelling and crude grammar. The writer claimed the kidney belonged to one of the victims and suggested that he had eaten the other half. Police and medical experts argued over whether the kidney was authentic. Some investigators believed the package could have been another hoax created by medical students or pranksters. Others feared it was genuine evidence sent directly from the killer himself. The public horror intensified. Now the murderer was no longer just killing in silence. He appeared to be communicating with the city. Mocking investigators. Playing with the press. Feeding the growing fear-consuming London. Meanwhile, the police investigation became increasingly desperate. Hundreds of officers searched Whitechapel daily. Thousands of residents were questioned. Detectives followed endless leads that led nowhere. Suspicion fell on butchers, doctors, immigrants, sailors, laborers, and even members of the aristocracy. But despite the enormous manhunt, investigators faced a devastating reality. They had almost no physical evidence. No fingerprints. No murder weapon. No reliable witness able to identify the killer clearly. The streets of Whitechapel swallowed clues as quickly as they appeared. And while London focused on the letters and newspaper hysteria, the killer was preparing for what many investigators would later consider his most horrifying murder of all. The murder of Mary Jane Kelly. By November 1888, Whitechapel was exhausted by fear. The streets remained crowded, but anxiety hung over the district like a permanent fog. Women feared walking alone at night. Men watched strangers with suspicion. Police officers worked endless shifts searching for a killer who seemed to disappear into darkness after every attack. Yet despite the growing pressure, the murders had not stopped. The final and most horrifying of the so-called canonical murders would occur on November 9, 1888. The victim was Mary Jane Kelly. Unlike the previous victims, Kelly was younger and considered more attractive. Very little about her early life could be confirmed with certainty. Many stories about her past were contradictory. Some claimed she came from Wales. Others believed she had lived in Ireland or worked in wealthy districts before falling into poverty. But by 1888, she too had become trapped inside the brutal reality of Whitechapel. Kelly lived in a small single-room dwelling at Miller's Court, a narrow and crowded passage connected to Dorset Street, one of the most dangerous streets in London. Unlike the other victims, who were murdered outdoors, Mary Jane Kelly had a room of her own. Tiny, cold, and poor, but still a private space away from the streets. On the evening before her death, witnesses saw Kelly drinking with friends and walking through the neighborhood. Several people later claimed to have seen her accompanied by different men during the night. As with previous murders, witness statements quickly became confused and contradictory. Then, during the morning of November 9, a landlord's assistant arrived at Kelly's room to collect overdue rent. When nobody answered, he looked through the broken window beside the door. What he saw shocked even hardened investigators. Mary Jane Kelly's body lay on the bed inside the small room. The murder scene was unlike anything the police had ever encountered. Because the killer had privacy and time, the mutilations were vastly more extreme than in any previous attack. Furniture was covered in blood. Parts of the room appeared almost unrecognizable. Doctors and officers who entered the scene later described it as one of the most horrifying sights of their careers. Even newspapers, known for sensational reporting, avoided printing many details publicly. The brutality suggested something terrifying. The murderer was becoming increasingly savage. Increasingly confident. Or increasingly unstable. Investigators sealed off Miller's Court immediately. Crowds gathered outside as rumors spread through Whitechapel within hours. Many citizens believed the killer had finally lost all restraint. Others feared the murders would continue escalating even further. But strangely, after the death of Mary Jane Kelly, the killings appeared to stop. No confirmed canonical murder matching the same pattern ever occurred again. And that raised the greatest mystery of all. Why did the murders end? Did the killer die? Was he arrested for another crime? Did he leave London? Or did he simply stop? No answer was ever proven. As the months passed, police investigations slowly lost momentum. Witness memories faded. Evidence disappeared. Newspapers shifted toward new stories. But the mystery refused to die. Because Jack the Ripper had become something larger than a criminal investigation. He had become a legend. Years passed after the murder of Mary Jane Kelly, but the identity of Jack the Ripper remained unknown. The greatest detectives of Victorian London had failed to catch him. No arrest was ever officially made. No suspect was ever proven guilty. And as time moved forward, the Whitechapel murders slowly transformed from a police investigation into one of the greatest mysteries in modern history. But the mystery itself created a new obsession. People wanted answers. Who was Jack the Ripper? Theories began appearing almost immediately after the murders. Some believed the killer possessed medical knowledge because of the precision of certain injuries. Others argued that the mutilations were too chaotic to belong to a trained surgeon. Every suspect seemed possible, and impossible, at the same time. Over the decades, dozens of names emerged. Some investigators suspected local butchers accustomed to knives and animal dissection. Others focused on violent criminals already living in Whitechapel. Certain theories accused sailors who disappeared from London after the murders ended. Then came more sensational claims. Some writers accused members of the royal family. Others suggested secret societies, corrupt officials, or elaborate conspiracies designed to hide the truth from the public. But despite more than a century of investigation, no theory has ever been universally accepted. Among the most discussed suspects was Montague Druitt, a schoolteacher and barrister whose body was discovered in the River Thames shortly after the Kelly murder. Some officials privately suspected he may have been the killer, though evidence remained weak and largely circumstantial. Another famous suspect was Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber living in Whitechapel. Police documents from the period suggested that certain investigators strongly suspected him, but once again, proof was lacking. There was also George Chapman, a poisoner later executed for murdering multiple women, and Francis Tumblety, an eccentric American doctor known for misogynistic behavior and strange medical interests. Each suspect seemed to fit part of the story. But none fit perfectly. And that uncertainty kept the mystery alive generation after generation. As the 20th century progressed, the Jack the Ripper case became larger than the murders themselves. Books, films, documentaries, and endless investigations attempted to solve the puzzle. Historians studied old police files. Amateur detectives analyzed witness statements and crime scene maps. Modern forensic experts revisited surviving evidence hoping new technology could finally reveal the killer's identity. Yet the deeper researchers looked into the case, the more complicated it became. Contradictions appeared everywhere. Witnesses disagreed. Documents were missing. Reports conflicted with each other. Even basic details about the murders remain debated today. And perhaps that is why the legend never disappears. Jack the Ripper represents more than an unsolved crime. He represents fear hiding inside a modern city. The darkness beneath progress and civilization. A killer without a face. A mystery without an ending. More than a century later, the fog of Whitechapel still lingers in the imagination of the world. The gas lamps are gone. The old streets have changed. Victorian London has disappeared into history. But the name remains. Jack the Ripper. The unidentified killer who turned fear into legend. And vanished forever into the darkness.